Good for her. Hey, Mike, how are you? That was me that called you.
Yeah, I called back like,
I was down here. By the time I got up there, I was like, well, at least
mine, okay. What did
you're
you want?
coming.
Oh,
I
you
wanted
want
to
me
know
know
if,
if I was?
oh,
I beat it. Yeah, second time. Twice in 95 days I had it. I was very different the 2 times too. First time I had like a bad fever and all. This time I just had a cold, but I was very positive. Bright red for a week straight. Yeah. But I'm a walking antibody now.
Good soup, huh?
It was great soup. Thank you. It was really very good.
We get that. It's called honey baked ham. I get it from Georgia. From the mother sends it.
Oh, really?
And they have these special soup packets. So you get you have a ham, you get the ham bone, you take the meat from it. And just,
Oh, it was great. I loved it. When I got it, it was warm. I ate some. I just ate it then, and then I ate the next day.
yeah.
It was great.
How you
Your
feel?
wife probably thought she'd never get that back either.
We got plenty of those
So
things.
well, there you go. I remembered.
How you feeling, right?
I'm doing good. Yeah, it took a week to get negative, but I did.
That was for the second time.
Yep. Within 95 days.
Yeah.
Do we just renew your contract or something? It's getting fancy around here.
I think, yeah, this is it. Yeah, I threw it all into this. Well, you know, this fancy thing, West Cape May, I took all my notes for an application on it, and then I lost it. And it died. I did my notes, and that's the last time I do that.
But don't you have iCloud?
I have everything. I don't understand where it went. I still don't know.
That's what I love about
I can do my whole law, our whole law firm is on this thing, this Clio.
Right.
I can go into every file that we have,
Robert?
and like,
it. Just love that automatic
I can go in there.
How are you?
photos, all that.
I have the entire case on.
You didn't like it where you were
all
sitting
the
before?
complaints, everything. It's crazy. It can do everything. I can bring up every document that we have.
Well, you're gonna have to take Ricky's place. And every now and then you gotta give him an elbow to the ribs. All right, guys, ready? Evening, everybody, and the regular planning board, City of Cape May Planning Board meeting is now in session in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act of 1975. Adequate notice this meeting has been provided. Should any member of this board have reason to believe this meeting is being held in violation of that act, they shall so state at this time. Hearing none, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay, Mr. Bizarre,
Here.
Mr. Jones,
Here.
Mr. Belasco,
Here.
Mr. Crowley,
Here.
Mr. Gorgon,
Here.
Mayor Mullick, Councilmember Yeager,
Here.
Mrs. Reed, Mr. Lundholm, Mr. Malloy,
Here.
Mr. Paducis.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, the first item is approval of the minutes from January 10th, 2023. Motion to approve? So moved. Thank you, Bob. Thanks, Dennis.
So is that a motion by Mr. Gorgon, seconded by Mr. Crowley?
That's correct.
Is that right? Thank
Yes.
you. Mr. Belasco,
Yes.
Mr. Gorgon,
Yes.
Mayor Mullick,
Abstain.
Councilmember Yeager,
Yes.
Mr. Crowley,
Yes.
Mr. Malloy,
Abstain.
Mr. Paducis,
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Bizarre?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, as I mentioned a couple meetings ago, the master plan was analyzed, and we made a lot of recommendations about a year and a half ago, and sort of things got stalled. So we've got some time now, and I think that it's incumbent on us, based on what the council would like us to. I'll turn over to the mayor for a second. And
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, I was sworn in. I missed the last planning board meeting. I was sworn in by the city clerk earlier this week, just so everyone knows. But, and I think what we're looking for tonight is just getting started, or at least the city council would, of course, like to see from the planning board what we see as kind of the low-hanging fruit. Now, I said that to the deputy city manager today, and he mentioned that we thought the low-hanging fruit was the datum on the flood level, but in any event, we did get that through eventually. So looking for any other similar low-hanging fruit that the planning board would recommend to city council. Or not low-hanging if it's important, obviously, yeah.
I mean, actually, the process is that the planning board did the master plan review, and it's really the council's job to make any changes based on that review. So I think, from my understanding, Craig's backed me up on this, council's looking for a little bit of
Direction.
direction from the planning board as to what to be approved or not. And there's probably a hierarchy of items in the master plan.
Can I
Sure.
ask a question? I just want to be sure that, so when this comes back from the planning board, that the council is going to be able to comment on each individual section of this, not just this document as a whole?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. And it doesn't have to come back all together in one document.
Right.
We could be doing 5 or 6 recommendations at a time to go back to council. So you're not,
Very good.
you're not being burdened by some of the ones that are need a little more in-depth discussion.
Right.
So my thought tonight is that we could go by, there's 45 points in the recommendations, and I had kind of culled through them. I'm sure most of you guys have too. And I think if we could maybe do, as the mayor said, the low-hanging fruit, or maybe categorize the low-hanging fruit and get started with that, hopefully. And then we work our way through all these things. Some things we just may decide are just too controversial, or maybe the time's not right for them yet. And some of them maybe we don't agree on. So if it's okay with you guys, I'll throw a few paragraph numbers out. If anybody has an objection to let's putting them on the first or top tier.
Didn't we knock a few of them out, though, the last, about a year and a half ago when we discussed this? There was a group of them where there were typos,
What
for instance.
the mayor indicated with the low-hanging fruit was that, so the ordinance changes that I remember or recall the board reviewing on behalf of council, and that the ones that were adopted pertained to the building height as well as the finished floor, changing datums, going to from the old datum to the new 1988 datum.
So those have been done.
Yeah, those have already been accomplished. Most of the other stuff that was like very easy, just changes to terminology, that we never got done, to my knowledge.
And if we go through, I mean, if we go through the numbers of the paragraphs, I'll throw some out. And if it was done and we weren't aware of it, we'll pass on that because it's already been accomplished.
Yeah.
And if anybody else has any thought, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but we need to start somewhere, and I'm going to throw it out there and then let everybody else have their opinion. So let's get started. It doesn't have to be a long night tonight. It's just let's identify the ones we want to discuss, and we're not voting on anything tonight. We'll take them back home, look at them, think about them, come back next meeting. That's sort of the game plan, all right? So, the ones I see as being relatively straightforward, and I think some of these might already have been adopted, is number 9 and number 10, which are basically typos in the R1 zone. Number 12, which addresses some changes to zoning districts that events of the last several years have seemed to have already, are really
So
pushing this to.
So number 12, just quite simply, the zoning board granted use variances for a residential use in the C5 district. And they did that, and the developer built them according to the adjacent R3, so it just makes sense to roll those lots right into the R3 development that is immediately abutting the project. So that was that recommendation.
Just those lots that have already happened, or
Just
Additional.
those.
is
Just,
there any suggestion that other ones should be that?
I did not suggest that, and
Right now, it's
that
just
wasn't the
14.
recommendation that was done at the time, but it was only those two that were discussed. If we're looking into that, we may take a street-wide look at the rest of those lots and see if it makes sense to change.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So like,
Because the idea is to avoid
so
future
there's,
variances as well.
yes, so,
Right.
so a lot of these are like very easy. Some involve additional study and, analysis. Other ones could be controversial. So that's,
I was trying to pick the easy ones.
yeah, so like, but anyway, I thought it was, you know, it's obvious if you have two lots that were developed under the R3 criteria that are still located in the C5 district, it makes sense to incorporate those into the R.
But as Rich said, it also makes sense to look at the rest
But
of the
yeah,
lot.
so like while we're doing that, we can take another further look along Elmira Street to see if there's any other lots that need to be incorporated.
Okay. Number 18. Anybody thinks I'm skipping over any uncomplicated ones, let me know. I'm leaving Village Green out of this right now. That's kind of a spider's web. 18, deals with a side yard of 0 feet for the R5 zone. You want to explain that one?
Yeah, so there was some missing bulk and area controls in there, as well as some inconsistent ones. So we are recommending that we fix that and wrap that up in a tight bow.
Number 25,
Mr. Chairman, can you, I'm sorry, I kind of missed that. I was a little behind there. Can you explain 18 again?
So 18, there is no standard for side yard setbacks for semi-detached structures currently listed. The minimum lot size and minimum lot size per dwelling unit are inconsistent and should be corrected. And that's 1,500 square feet versus 2,500 square foot for the single-family detached uses, semi-detached, and two-family detached uses. So essentially just getting some consistency with regards to the uses and their bulk and area controls.
Okay.
25. Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Take a look at number 19.
Okay.
Would you like me to elaborate? So 19, there are no, and the S1 and S2 districts, and specifically the S1, I believe, which is the Beach Strand district, we have a bunch of commercial uses in there, and there's no permitted commercial uses in there. And we know that we have a bunch of existing permitted uses in there that we should incorporate into the bulk and area standards.
Yes.
As permitted uses.
I think that's what I was thinking. But doing that would then create standards by which those properties can be evaluated.
Yeah, I think the only, like, real standard is in there is we permit arcades, and there's standards in there for how close the machines can be to the door, stuff like that. There's no other real bulk and area standards for those uses
So even though there are in fact restaurants, bars,
and other
hot dog
commercial,
stands,
yes,
souvenir
commercial
shops,
uses.
fudge shops, right?
I don't think there's any bars,
The restaurant has a bar, doesn't it?
not that I'm aware
No,
of.
they don't have a bar. Which one? BYOB. Oh, it's BYOB, okay.
Right,
All right.
okay.
And by the way, connected with that one also, it's my understanding that the city leases the properties in that zone to hotels for their use.
They lease the beach.
Yeah. If it's in the S1 zone, probably ought to have some standards regarding that process too.
Well, it's a beach. We don't regulate leases, we just regulate the use. Whether it's leased or rented or
Well, wouldn't-
sold or bought, we don't regulate that activity.
Okay, well, all right.
I mean, I know you're looking to generate revenue, that's not our job. Okay?
I understand that.
Huh?
But wouldn't the zoning ordinances have standards by which properties along S1 would, when they are leased, what would they be used for? How would they be used?
That's in there.
I think they're already in there
That's in
as
there.
permitted uses.
Oh, those are the
Yeah.
non-permanent buildings.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
all right.
That's actually, that's primary.
Recreational uses of a nature ordinarily permitted on a beach are permitted uses. Amusement centers and existing structures, beach protection projects, Those are the only listed permitted uses in the S1. The S2 virtually has no permitted uses because that's really an area that's reserved for conservation.
So it's beach-related uses,
I-
okay? All right, so add number 19 to that list that I have. Number 28, I'm sorry, 25.
So,
Pretty self-
okay, yeah, this one just pretty much says if you want to do a sign, you got to come in front of the board, even though that's not triggering site plan review or anything like that. It's just, it's really not, it's,
We've got sign regulations, it
Onerous
should just be a
for-
building permit rather than having to
Yeah.
come in front of the board. All right, 28. Suggest we should be looking at shower sizes because it's more modern showers are wider than 4x4. Again, I mean, this is kind of stuff we could even put into a resolution form by the next meeting if everybody's feels comfortable with a lot of these changes on their own. Number 29. That's something we do need to clarify.
yeah, so the fence height, the 6-foot fence height is supposed to, the way that it reads, the solid fences or walls located in any required yard area may not exceed 4 feet in height. Fences may be constructed to 6 feet in height when located in the rear. What does in the rear mean? Is it rear of the front face of the structure? Is it rear of the back face of the structure? Is it only in the rear yard setbacks? It's been unclear.
If you're gonna do that, maybe you should give some thought to corner lots.
Correct.
Yeah, I have 2 front yards.
Yep. Again, these are things we're going to go home and give some chew on it, and come back, talk a little more about it next time.
Yeah, what I would suggest, you don't have to do it, so I'm just gonna throw it out there, is sometimes it's easier if you give your thoughts on each one of these, and then have Craig draft actual proposed ordinance changes, and I can work with him on that if we have to, so that when you send it to the council, they're not guessing. They can tweak it, they can do whatever they want with it, but just actually give them what we mean by consider corner lots. They give them actual ordinance changes to consider, and then, you know, Chris, Gillen Schwartz, and the board can do whatever they want with that, but you kind of want to hand it to them as a, you know, I think.
So we're going to just leave that till next time, or you want to discuss more of that now?
Well, I think we should go through and
All right, categorize.
figure out what we want to tackle first,
Right,
and then, after we figure that out, figure out how we want to tackle it. Do you want me to draft ordinances and circulate them for review and critique, and then we forward them to the governing body, which is kind of the way that I've used to do them? Or if there's some other recommendation, I'll listen to that.
I prefer that process myself.
Right.
okay, then we'll move on.
That way Craig can draw from other experiences, because he's seen these ordinances before, and
Right.
in his mind, he knows what he wants to say about where that rear fence should start. He knows from the rear facing, that way he can put in that language, and if you don't like it, you can change it, but at least Craig can put in there the benefit of his experience in drafting of that, and I can look at it too.
Looks like number 30's already been addressed.
30 and 31 were both addressed.
30 and 31 were addressed. 32,
32 is we have new stormwater regs. There's no requirement to connect to the city's stormwater system in any of those requirements. So therefore, that requirement that exists in our code is obsolete. So it should be removed. So that's really easy. Just-
Which one, which? 32. 32.
Item number 32 on off-street, whoops. Yeah, off-street parking design standards should be revised to eliminate the obsolete provision that surface drainage is required to be connected to the city's stormwater system.
Okay, we've got, my next one is 35. Again, more housekeeping than anything. Craig?
So a lot of ordinances are outdated with the new technology and lighting requirements and general accepted planning standards with regards to lights. I've redone numerous ordinances for other towns and to update that, so we could just take a fresh look and spruce up our controls with regards to lighting.
Craig, on that, one complaint that I've gotten from some residents is the brightness of some of them. Is there a certain
Foot candle.
foot candle? that-
Intensity, yes.
Okay.
Yes, so one of the things that's in your ordinance, it says that, all lighting shall be 1.5 foot candles. That's really bright.
Okay.
I always, whenever I'm reviewing stuff, recommend that the applicant lessens that light and requests a waiver. So we actually are steering developers to grant waivers for less light. So it makes sense to,
I think with the LED lighting, it's just, everybody knows they're not using as much electricity, and I've seen some of them where it just seems really bright.
yes.
Because I've gotten photographs from people, hey, this is what I'm staring at, and I understand. I mean, there's obviously the balance with safety as well,
There's also shielding.
Right.
Shielding,
Be built
what-
into it, right.
what's great about the new LED technology is you can actually, without changing out the fixture, you can reduce the intensity of the light.
Right.
So they're variable, which helps. So like a lot of times when I do final inspections, I'm like, whoa, they're way too bright, you gotta turn it down. And they can, without changing fixture, 10 years ago, they used to, that's a $5,000 ask.
Right.
Now it's just to them going out there and having their electrician dial it back.
I'm sorry.
Does this also include the color of the light?
It can,
Is it, I don't know if it's necessary or not, because going from,
The white
having a bright white versus a kind of an amber
Soft
color.
light?
HPC
Yeah.
has
yeah,
recommendations.
and we have another layer on top of this. This is just, I can't just fit this from the
Right.
last one I did. I mean, the HPC should be involved in developing these
I
standards.
agree. And it could be different in different parts of the town, too.
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a point, living in the historic district, what I'm noticing is, granted, people are putting in modernized LED lighting in their homes, and then the house next door to will have the traditional lighting. It just seems like it's not helping the character of the neighborhood, but all these different LED lights and then traditional lights. It's not adding to the character of the neighborhood at all. Just a point.
Well, even on the mall, and I don't know if we can really get into regulating it or if we want to, but we did, when they did the string lights across the mall, that was at, I would say, kind of a nicer, like 2,700 Kelvin or whatever, more amber light. But then some of our gas lamps that actually have the bulbs in them, the electric bulbs, were really white. So they just actually changed some of them out, and as they're burning out, they're going to be changing more of them to a more amber color to match. But
Right, that's what's happening in the neighborhoods, is just not matching lights for outdoor.
Yeah. So this one seems like we have a consensus that we want to do this. It just may be a little bit more involved and involve the HPC's involvement. So it may take a little longer to work out.
Are we talking about porch lighting as well? I mean, you can go into a porch light?
So we're reviewing generally subdivision applications, and those subdivision applications are controlled by the RSIS requirements for lighting, so we really don't have much control over those. And your site plans. So the commercial site plans that we see are really where we have control. We really don't have a lot of control over the individual porch lights and things like that.
No, but parking lot lights and things like that, we would.
Yeah.
Yes,
Control over.
correct. Commercial lighting for parking lots, pedestrian ways, et
Right.
cetera.
Greg, I hear the term dark sky compliant bantied about a lot during
Oh,
different
that.
meetings, and like, I hear that
Yes.
at Westgate, I hear it here occasionally. Is that a real thing, or is that
Yes,
like just?
so probably 15 years ago, there was this major push for this dark dark sky, I mean, they appeared before lots and lots of planning boards and governing bodies, and they're like, please adopt our dark sky standards, and so I have those. I mean, if anyone wants to see those, there's a lot of shielding involved, those types of ideas.
So that's like an ordinance that's prepackaged that you can adopt and,
They have a big packet, they hand it to every town and say, can you please adopt these standards?
You don't sound real thrilled with it.
No, I was not in favor of some of the things that were in there. And you have a large historic district, so some of those things may not be compatible with those ideas. But we can certainly consider,
I
recommendations.
just hear the term all the time. I didn't know if it was a real thing or if it's an ordinance that we had or that somebody had.
It's a real thing. Some ordinance actually refer to the dark sky requirements, and they cite whatever manual or standard that they have, and there's a reference in ordinances.
Looks like we're going to be talking about that one. 36. These are some recommendations that were given to us by the Shade Tree Commission and
Correct.
Environmental.
Environmental Commission, right?
So there's a recommendation and a requirement in your ordinance to comply with the book reference in the code known as the Backyard Habitat for Birds, a guide for landowners and communities in New Jersey. No one knows what those species are. So it's my suggestion is that we incorporate those species for street trees, for shrubs, et cetera, and give them a list in the ordinance that allows developers to very easily pick out what species the boards are encouraging, as well as the Environmental Commission.
And I think Mr. Yeager knows that the Environmental Commission and Mr. Jones, I think more recently did like an update to the, or was that the Shade Tree
I'll get you
Commission?
the-
Well, no, it was,
They
yeah.
have, they have what, the 12 species that they should be using
We have 12 that are they're actually outlawed.
outlawed, but they do have recommended.
But they have
do
recommended.
recommended list also that in fact, we just talked about that today. that We're going to get a brochure together and include that, not only have the ones that are restricted, but have the ones that they recommended that you could use. So it'll all be, you have it side by side to see what you.
So that seems like a simple one we could just add.
Yeah.
I think
right
so.
in.
I think
Definitely.
Would it also allow a homeowner or developer or landowner to replace a tree that's not indigenous to the area with a tree that is indigenous to the area?
Is it a benefit? I mean, from an environmental standpoint, absolutely. Not something that we are looking to legislate, of course, but to encourage, yes, yeah.
Okay, because in the past, that's been denied. Several occasions where someone's gone and asked for an indigenous tree to
I'm
be
sorry, to
replaced.
replace the Shade Tree
Non-indigenous
Commission's
tree,
not going to
yeah.
let them cut down a
No.
non-indigenous.
Right.
Now, if it's not a species that's a problem environmentally, then I can understand, yeah.
It's
Not
happened.
going to happen,
About
yeah.
cutting trees down, not
Right.
replacing a
Just
dying.
get rid of the tree and replace it with an indigenous tree.
Craig, with this particular instance, if we were able to put together an ordinance, maybe we could send it to the Shade Tree Commission for review, and then they could let us know, yeah, we'll buy into this removal of invasive species for the replacement of native species, instead of going straight to council.
Regardless of size?
Yeah, that's where I think a size would be a problem.
Right.
Well, I think that's what we'll work out with the
Yeah.
Shade Tree Commission.
That's important. That really is important.
Well, I think what we're talking about in this right now is if you're putting something in new,
Yes.
this is what you do. It's not a,
Right.
it's not a removal and replacement section of the ordinance. That's something that the Shade Tree Commission really is within their purview.
Yeah, that comes up on several of the applications I know, especially, for new construction, where they have not followed anything. They just did a landscaping plan, and we've always told them, that they have to meet, excuse me, the Shade Tree Commission requirements.
Yeah, your ordinance is very specific with when you can take trees down and when you can't. If it's within the footprint of the proposed structure, you're allowed to take it down, but it's at the 2-for-1 replacement. So you can take down a mature tree, but you gotta plant 2 more somewhere else on the lot to make up for it. Like it kind of does this replacement thing and says, if it's within 10 foot of the foundation, you're allowed to take it down. There are some controls in there with regards to removal of vegetation.
And if it's at 4 feet above the ground, if it's more than 8 inches in diameter, that's a threshold for not being able to take a tree down.
Is that for the entire Cape May or for certain areas of Cape May?
Whole-
Well, see, that's the problem. When you live in an area like the historic district where the lot sizes are a lot smaller than, if you go outside the area where you could have, 3/4 of an acre lot, replacing it with 2 trees is almost impossible if you just want to get rid of 1 tree. That's just the point I'm trying to make. It depends on the lot size.
But if it's in the historic district and it's not a result of new construction, and all it is a matter of, and it's not a dying tree, and if somebody wants to take it down and replace it, the taking down is what is the stop point. You're not even doing, they're not allowed to do that. So replacing with 2 doesn't come into play if you're not able to take the tree down to begin with. There's only certain circumstances where you're allowed to take a tree down of certain size. And this mostly has to do with new construction or additions or whatever, where the tree's in the way of it, or within 10 feet of a house.
I don't want to make a big point about this, but the only thing I wanted to state is there's no cohesiveness. There's just nothing that's actually etched in stone. It seems like the Shade Tree Commission could follow one thing while the ordinance says something else. So there just has to be some cohesiveness as to what can be done and what can't be done.
I don't know how to,
Whatever they're doing should be consistent with the ordinance. And I know that we review all applications with regards to the zoning ordinance, and it's in your zoning ordinance. So as far as consistency, I mean, those things are already on the books. For typical lots, I mean, for irregular cases and hardship cases, I mean, it's in the zoning code. You can ask for a variance or waiver from that. But
I think it's an interesting, it's more a shade tree issue, but it's an interesting question as to whether you should be able to replace or an invasive species with a native species of like size or whatever.
why wouldn't they?
But something that I think that
Why
we'd-
wouldn't they encourage that?
Right.
Yeah, well, invasive species, you can remove, I'm pretty sure. I don't think there's many trees that get that large that are invasive species. So you're certainly going to be encouraged to remove invasive species, but we're not demanding it with the ordinance that we passed. We only demand that you control an invasive species. But, you know, what we obviously want to encourage is what you want to encourage, is what I think you're saying is that everybody begin planting more natural, native plants in their yards. That's to be encouraged, but I can understand not wanting to cut down huge trees in exchange for two smaller trees,
On our
even
new,
though they're native.
on new applications, the Environmental Commission does get a copy of that application, and they do respond exactly the way they think. In other words, we have made them change what kind of plants they were going to plant and whatnot. And I know Craig has put that in as a condition of the approval, and in agreement with the property owner, but he's on record that this stuff has to be done, and particularly invasive plants, they don't want any of that stuff anymore. The landscapers, they have to become more educated in all this stuff too, because they just go willy-nilly after it. And it'll eventually get there. It'll eventually get there.
Okay. 37, pretty self-explanatory. Flag poles have to be 5 feet back.
Yes, at some point, there was an opinion that flagpoles or structures can't be in a front yard. we're going to allow them, they just have to be set back 5 feet from a property line. Clarification.
Yep. Moving on to 41. Want a little narrative on that, Craig?
Quite simply, your ordinance just says that there's a maximum patio and deck width of 50% of the lot width, which doesn't really coincide with setbacks. So you have a house that fits within the building setback envelope, and then you get to this, on a narrow lot, you get to this 50% thing, and then they can only have a portion of their back as a deck
Or front?
or front. Well, actually,
Decks and patios.
I think patios and decks are considered, they're not front porches. So you can still have a front porch. This is really affecting the backyards, I think.
We should make sure that's what it is.
We will.
Yeah, makes sense.
It's a nebulous restriction, not based on any,
It's been in there since I've been around.
so you would not have any limitation? They just can't be in the setbacks?
Can't be in the setback. Lot coverage is going to
coverage, all that.
control, is
Okay,
going to be
fine.
your control.
Have you ever seen it come up?
Yes.
And
but
did it decrease the,
When I review applications, particularly, you don't see many of them, but zoning board applications, I'll flag it. Hey, your patio or deck in the rear yard needs a variance. And they're like, really? I'm like, here, I cite the section, and they're like, okay, and we're going to ask for relief from that. And sometimes it's typically granted, or they revise the plans and have this weird deck that,
is the deck typically going outside the width of the structure?
no.
It's the other way around.
It's the other way.
Right,
They're,
right.
it's essentially in a line with the mass of the building, and then they have to cut it in to meet that
Right.
50%.
Okay.
And 42 is the last of my so-called straightforward ones. It makes sense to count your setbacks to the front face of a building, right?
Yeah, so the way that your ordinance reads is setbacks are measured to the nearest face of the structure. It doesn't matter what part of it is. If it's a stair projection, we're measuring the front yard setback to that stair. If it's an eave projection,
Got it,
your
got it.
roof eave that sticks out 18 inches, we're measuring it to that 18 inches and not the face of the structure that's 18 inches behind it. We get into this when applications are submitted, the surveyors are measuring to the face of the structure, they're not measuring the eaves. A lot of times, if they do measure to the eaves and we call them out as needing a variance, they will pull the eaves back, and then you end up with this odd building construction that's not really typical of Cape May style.
It looks terrible.
It looks
when they-
terrible.
When they don't have that soffit.
Aesthetically, you're having problems with that when they're trying to comply. If streetscape issues, so,
So if you have a garage in the back and you have a 5-foot side yard setback and your eave of your garage goes over 18 inches, you're okay. If it's 5 feet from the edge of the building, the face of the building, and you still have an 18-inch overhang on your roof,
you have to slide that building over 18 inches to comply.
They're measuring to the eave.
We measure to the eave, the nearest face of the structure.
that's the intent is from the eave.
It says to the eaves, we measure to eaves, gutters, whatever, that's how the ordinance reads.
And that's the way you think it ought to be.
No, I think it should be changed.
Thank
to
you.
the face
That's what I meant. That's what I meant.
Sorry.
That's what I meant. Okay.
Sorry.
Because, and you do see it in more of the modern construction where they have that like Monopoly house look, where the wall goes right up to the roof and then there's no eave just to meet the code. And frankly, for drainage, trying to get the water away from the wall of your house. I'm looking at some of the historic structures on the wall. You see a big soffit, 24 inches or more even.
From my standpoint, when I'm reviewing these applications and I tell someone about that requirement, and then they revise the plans and they come back with one that looks terrible, and they comply. Like, I don't know I don't think that's what we're looking for here. We're ended up with a worse product just for them to comply. And they're complying with all the other bulk and area requirements. If we're worried about mass, we have the floor area ratio, if those types of things. So I've seen a worse product by enforcing that regulation.
And the front step widths, that's an issue?
Yeah, so if we're going to not count the stairs in the front yards, there should be some type of regulation.
Can't
for it.
be.
They can't.
Can't be the whole thing.
So now we're, with the compliance with the flood regulations, we're having buildings go up, and some applicants are having these big double stairs that are dumping out both sides and extended into, so we have to be careful if you're going to measure to the face of the building and allow these stair projections, then we have to come up with stair requirements that protect the town.
Okay.
It's a good list.
Anybody have any, I've got another list, of which I think is like the next tier, which, again, trying to,
I'll bring up one that maybe is on your next tier,
Okay.
but it would be more controversial, but obviously, even since the writing of this in 2019 is the workforce housing, and I can't remember
Yep.
which.
Oh.
24.
that's up front.
And again, I recognize that this would need a lot of discussion and
24.
24 workforce housing. But I don't have to tell anybody here how the shortage of affordable housing for Cape May.
I do have that in the next tier. And the reason I started with the first one is that that's something we can hopefully get done with, pass it on, and then, maybe the next time pass that on, and then move forward with 24 is in my next, that's gonna take some discussion.
Yeah.
It's not as plain Jane as the stuff we've gone over already. Yeah, Dennis.
Yeah, back in June, we got a list of the variances granted by the Zoning Board of Adjustment for the last 3 years, not for 2022, but 19, 20, and 21. Did any of those, 46 of them were granted, there were 2 denials. Now, did any of those variances lend itself to making changes because they were agreeable to that, or whether
Good
they were
question. That's a good question.
actually good ideas?
It's a good question. That's part of their job, is to give us a report, and we're supposed to
Right.
see if there's any consistency.
So when I authored your master plan, we take all of those reports and look at that. So we look for, if we're consistently granting this variance in this zone, we're going to take a look at that. Some of the things that are in these recommendations come from those.
That's what I was
Yes.
asking, really, is there a cross-reference to the,
It's not specifically done that, but in my experience with reviewing these applications, I kind of flag them. I'm constantly, I use a paper ordinance and writing notes in all the time when I'm doing reviews. It's like, maybe we should take a look at this the next time we re-exam, and then I print out a new one every time we do a re-exam, so I have a fresh one to start with. But yes, they were looked at.
okay, so the low-hanging fruit set of recommendations that we're going to work on first, how many of those that we've discussed relate back to issues that were granted by variance? And would that then result, if we passed all these things on to council and they took action, would that reduce the number of variances that we would have to give?
Yeah, I didn't see anything that was going to increase them. Typically, we look at the development pattern to see what's being approved, to see whether it's consistent with the way that you guys want to plan things. make sure that those things
Yeah,
are.
so applications would come in, but I guess the word I'm going to use is cleaner with respect to the standards.
Yeah, I mean, you're still Cape May, and you still have undersized lots and irregular shaped lots, and,
Yeah, actually, the answer to this question is yes.
Yes, yeah.
Because I can think of at least three.
Right.
The ones where where you may change the zone of some of the lots in Elmira, because usually what happens is if you start getting houses and commercial lots, it goes right down the road. So if you change that zone, you might eliminate those. The Strand is another one. We had 2 or 3
Use variances.
use variance applications at the zoning board for, to put in a restaurant where there's one of the uses on the boardwalk is a permitted use. There's like 1.5 arcades. Everything else that's on there has a use variance. So all those would be eliminated. A couple of years ago, and I don't know if that was before or 2019 or 20, we used to get a ton of variances for undersized lots, because every time somebody would tear down a house that was, I don't know, like 4,200 in a 4,500 zone or something, they would need a lot area variance. And and that was fixed. We eliminated a lot of those. I don't know if that was in 20 or 19 or whatever.
That was more than
So
that.
maybe.
it was before, it was
Just before that.
2015 or 2017.
Was it really?
Yes.
Well, it's probably 17, because
Yeah.
I just got it. So, yeah, so that eliminated a
That was,
variance a month.
that was a direct request from the zoning board. They're rubber stamping these variance applications on these undersized lots when they're complying with all the other setbacks and floor area ratio and all of those lot coverage things, and they're still needing to get a variance from them. So now we fix that. If you're complying with all the other bulk and area regulations, you can go right and pull your building permit.
The most frequent variant, not most frequent, but a frequent variance we're getting now is pools. Pools are a hot thing, and we have a regulation about distance between a pool and a structure that is of, I don't want to say dubious, but, that is not a common restriction. But if you get rid of that, then that puts more pools and more backyards, and that doesn't seem to be what everybody wants. So, what, the things you would do to eliminate variances might not be things you really want to do.
Right. One of the trends on those approved variances was the parking standards, which is a big part of this master plan in other areas. It's probably, hopefully will be on your next set of issues.
Parking standards?
Yes, they're
All right, let me explain that, though. I had this conversation with someone else about parking. If you really dig down into those, and Craig will correct me if I'm wrong, because he gets into the details a lot more than I do, but I kind of see this finished product. A lot of those variances that are parking variances are improvements on parking. So some of those are places that have no parking. They require 2 spots, and they come in and they're giving us 1. Or they require 3, and they have 1, and they're giving us 2. So they still require a variance because they don't meet the requirement, but they are improving the parking situation. So you have someone who comes in for a variance, and they'll want a side yard variance and a lot coverage variance, something like that, okay? But they'll offset that by saying, but we're doing a new structure, and we are actually gonna make room for a parking space where none existed before. So even though 2 is required, they do find room for 1, and they improve the parking situation, and they really do. So a lot of those variances are actually, if you go back and look at the chart, you're gonna see that they have more parking spaces than they started with, and they were 0 before.
Typically an
Why don't you give me a
improvement,
look?
but not compliance.
Well,
But there was nothing there before. There was no need for the.
no, there was a structure there that had no parking.
Oh, you're talking about replacing
Right,
the
yeah,
structure?
we get virtually no new construction. I mean, no, virtually no construction on vacant land. That rarely has a variance application because they can start from scratch. What we'll get is someone who's adding or going up, right? They're becoming flood compliant, and they make room for parking, but they can't make room for all the parking they need. So a lot of those parking, just trust me when I tell you, a lot of those parking variances, if you look on Craig's chart, which is existing, required, proposed, right? You will see that they're required will be 3, existing will be 1, proposed will be 2, or some variation of that. Very rarely is there something where we give a variance for parking that is worse than when it started. Right,
I
Craig?
can't recall any,
Yeah.
that there's always an improvement, or there's no room and it stays, there's existing 0, proposed 0.
On some
How
historic
about
structure.
the restaurant in the arcade in S1? that was put in there.
There's no
Existing,
allowed uses.
existing 0, proposed 0.
Right,
Yeah, there's no park.
and there's no allowed uses, so there's no requirement for it. And how are you gonna put parking on the beachfront, Dennis?
Oh, no. But how can you put a restaurant?
Yeah, you figured,
How can you
There
put
wasn't
a-
much evidence that the restaurant was going to generate more parking than an arcade.
What's that?
There's not a lot of evidence in the ordinance that a restaurant would generate that much more parking than the arcade.
The
An
restaurant,
An amusement use and a restaurant use, I mean, I don't know that they are.
Your ordinance is pretty crusty and old with regards to the methodology for determining the right amount of parking spaces, the required number of parking spaces. So.
Well, then
I
maybe
think-
that'll-
I think there
that'll
was a
be
rec-
where we start.
I think there's a recommendation in here that says to like take a fresh look at that.
that's where we ought to start, to see how uncrusty we can make our ordinance. with
Well, you
respect-
said you wanted to start with the low-hanging fruit. I don't know that that's low-hanging.
No, I didn't say that. I said
All
this
right,
was,
someone said.
I said this would be hopefully in the next set of issues
Gotcha.
that the chairman would want to raise.
Can I ask a question regarding number 24? I'm wondering whether numbers 22 and 23, should they be rolled in with that? Because seems to be a relationship with them for workforce housing, what have you. I don't know if they can all be dealt
what
with.
number?
Well, to go along with 24 would be 22 and 23.
So 22, comprehensively re-examine and address the standards for the C1 district, the Washington Street Mall and Mall Primary Business District. Availability of off-street parking in this area is extremely lacking, and the ability to develop new parking is problematic due to land availability. Availability of workforce housing has also been cited as a concern.
And that's what I'm,
Yeah, so
so,
a lot of the
They do-
places above the mall, commercial, are sitting
vacant or
vacant
storage?
or fallow because there's no parking and they have not been able to secure parking, so.
although we have given variances to the development of second floors on some of the properties in the mall that waive the parking requirement.
Yeah.
So,
That's
Maybe what we should be
Right.
doing is not having that be a requirement to begin with, so that it encourages.
To encourage
And that-
developing those as
and that
apartments
was a
made for
discussion, and
workforce.
that's how these recommendations
Right.
ended up yes, so they all go together.
Yeah, so 22 and 23 should be considered along with 24.
be no.
No, everything can't be no, but things can be clearer. Go ahead.
All right, if you want, I'll go through my next tier. Or if you just want to leave it where we are now, we can,
I'd be interested in what's on your next tier.
okay. He wants the hard stuff. Well, and there's more than that. There's,
How many tiers are there, by the way?
at this point, there's 2 plus what's left.
So everything.
We had 0.
This sounds like a parking calculation.
I was using a parking thing. All right, so my next tier would be starting off with number 8. And again, Craig,
Yeah, so I thought this was an easy one.
well, we can throw that in, we can throw that in with the top one then.
So, two-family dwellings have a specific lot size that's based on the 2 units. However, many of the existing properties that are out there with those side-by-sides have individual lot line and runs through a party wall. So, and I think with just the way that real estate is and the fee simple lots should be encouraged and incorporated in, that should be permitted in your bulk and area standards. So it's not changing the density and the lot sizes. You're still going to have the same amount of lot sizes, but allows for fee simple lots for those types of structures,
As opposed to condoing them out.
as opposed to condos, right?
So you want to move that up to the first tier?
Yeah.
Everybody's good with that?
Yeah.
Except for Dennis? Okay, my next one is number 9 and 10. I'm sorry, next one's number 11. this one will take some discussion.
Yes.
But I think it's fairly clear. It's not nebulous. I mean, it's a.
No, it's, you're right. It's fairly clear, but it has an impact that I think that, you know, we all need to discuss,
Okay.
because I'm not in favor of the impact. And you know, I'd hear more explanation from everybody as to why, and I'd see an explanation here, but I'm not real thrilled with number 11.
Okay. But that's going to take some more discussion,
It's going to take some discussion.
but it's not cloudy.
And this is
That-
one of those,
yeah.
so this is one of those cases where, you know, we can do all the work we want to, but if the governing body's not on board, it's
Right.
not going to go anywhere. So should we waste time on this until we have some direction from the governing body as to whether they're willing to really, you know, is this something they're really wanting to incorporate? And this is just a perfect example of, like, why we should be on the same page, because they're the ones that make policy. So.
And I would be glad to have that as a discussion.
I think we,
You know,
we have a
at
long
council.
list before it.
We do.
So let's knock that list down and then,
Yeah.
but I think, look, it's
get
on
to
the,
this point.
it's on the agenda for discussion at some
Right.
point.
Okay.
Number 13, and 14, and 15,
So Village Green
16, and
stuff.
17.
So all of the
All
village,
Village Green.
all of the Village Green stuff,
The R4 recommendations.
when we discussed this with, when we drafted the, drafted the master plan re-exam, I think we realized there was a lot more study involved. We needed to do a bit more study with regards to the treatment of corner lots and these structures and accessory structures, the various uses, there's quads, there's the duplexes. So I didn't think that that was low-hanging fruit, and I think we need to do there's some
Correct.
investigative and study involved in that one.
So you want to recommend a bundling of all these R4 recommendations into a study?
Hopefully.
Yeah, I don't think that that's low-hanging fruit. I think we should
Yeah.
tackle some of the other stuff before we jump into
Yeah,
those.
they're all pretty
So,
complicated. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things, and I'm not sure that we even have any control over this, is there have been the very first generation of quads. Everybody knows how they are down there. You've got 2 parking spaces and actually 4 parking spaces that are on the front properties, none in the back.
Right.
And 2 of the ones in the back, they get parking spaces. Well, it was never memorialized in the subdivision or in the resolutions that those spaces in the back were technically to be used by the people in the back. So there's been a couple of lawsuits where the owner up front said, that's on my property. And forbid the people in the back from parking their cars in it. And it went, there's not a recorded case yet. There's been several, I've got copies of stuff. There've been several, what do you call them before they get to be recorded? They work things out and.
Settlements?
What's the word, John? Settlements, I guess.
So,
you got an attorney.
So.
Sounds a lot like some demand letters were sent.
I struggle with that a little bit. I don't know.
There hasn't been a legal precedent set that a court said, yes, that's how it should be.
Arbitration.
Yeah, we didn't do that. It was just- Yeah, but at any rate, I don't know if we have any control over that. The later generations of Village Green Twins had in there that it was in the deeds that you have, the back unit has a use of that front space. I just you hate to see neighbors fighting each other over something that just seems like a logical, this is what really was meant to be. And I don't know that we can.
Can we do that, Mr. King? I mean,
No.
Okay.
I mean, what you were saying, can you clarify their property rights? No.
That's really what I'm.
I mean, the only way that you could do it is if they were doing something on the property and they didn't have a parking space, and you say, well, you need a parking space, do an addition or something, but I mean, no, it's just,
Is the Village Green Association enough that they could do that?
I guess it's individual property rights we're talking about.
I mean, is the Village Green, if this,
I
if,
I don't know how their system works. I don't know
Okay.
if they have bylaws, if they have a master deed, they can amend the master. I don't know how they did
It's a
theirs.
civic association.
Yeah,
Do they have any real authority?
No.
no.
Well, then can't.
Not to change property rights.
I think you have a mess over there that's never going to get sorted out until.
Until you get
Legal
a decision,
action.
until you get
Legal
actually
action.
a decision.
Well, I hate to bring this up now, because it's probably in your.
don't,
No, he really doesn't hate to. He really wants to.
I was gonna raise at some point is, the issue I was gonna raise at some point is the reality that the residential housing stock, which this code controls, has transformed itself over time into more of a commercial venture than a residential venture. And that the residential housing stock, we have, at last count, over 1,000 mercantile licenses granted to residential properties as a business. And the Village Green is a very attractive source for seasonal rentals, weekly rentals.
Dennis, that's out of our purview.
No, it's not.
The
I
use
don't,
of a property, how it's used is not something we look at.
well, if you look at the residential categories in our code, some of them permit tourists and guest houses and some don't.
But it also allows single-family homes, it also allows duplexes. We don't say what it has to be. And we certainly don't say that there's fees have to be paid if you're renting versus a second home.
Then what's the difference between a commercial zone and a residential zone?
You can't have a restaurant in a residential zone.
So, but you say a commercial restaurant, how about,
You're confusing money-generating municipal laws with zoning rights, property rights.
no, I'm not confusing that at all. What I'm saying is that this code may, in fact, not recognize a new phenomenon that's taken place since this code was written, and that is that people are merchandising their property, not to live in, but to make money on, to be commercial. And that Airbnbs, seasonal rentals, that whole industry was not in existence.
Sure it was. Cape May is the oldest seashore resort in the country. It's been a rental, there've been rentals and people visiting here for generations.
Oh, well, I know that, but the variety of rental properties and the commercialization
So
is
what's
unprecedented.
changed? What's changed? Single-family houses have always been there. Hotels have always been there. What's changed in the last?
Single-family houses have not always been used predominantly for a business or residential.
We don't regulate that. That's not a planning board function.
Is that correct?
Yes, although I have one possible exception.
What's that?
I'm not sure about the Airbnb thing. I mean, the properties have always been rented,
Yeah.
and you can't discriminate based on the fact that someone is a renter versus a
Second home.
live-in owner or second homeowner, or they rent out for 7 weeks and therefore they can't have a pool. That doesn't make any sense from a zoning perspective. Although I do agree that if a house is on the street and it's renting by the night for Airbnbs and it's operating like a hotel and people are going in and out every day, that stops feeling residential to me. It starts to feel commercial, so I understand your concern about that. I know towns are struggling with that Airbnb concept, but
Or if people are renting out a room in their house, Airbnb, that becomes a different.
yeah, but I mean,
Different
just
animal.
the fact that these things are rented out weekly or something, that's.
And I guess that's my point. My point is our zoning code doesn't recognize this new phenomenon, and should it? That's my point.
Well, that we could go on. You and I could go through the 12-pack and not come to a resolution of that.
Well,
But the thing is, there's property rights and there's uses, and the fact that people are generating income from renting their properties out does not negate the fact that what their use is there, and it's allowed.
and I guess back to Rich's point, it's an open question about whether this new usage is permitted. That's all, I'm raising questions.
Let
It's-
me, it's true that if you have a town where none of the houses are rented,
Right.
okay, the pools in the backyard may be very quiet. When I grew up, pools were like kind of semi-annoying, but mostly quiet, okay? Now, if you have a town where every house is rented by the week for summer vacations, those pools are gonna be louder, all right? So then would you start maybe regulating pools differently in your town as a result of that? Absolutely, you might.
Well, the council's already actually done that.
And you might be more concerned about parking. So, I mean, I think that is an appropriate zoning consideration, the manner in which it's used residentially. I mean, that's a legitimate zoning consideration. You just can't treat individual houses differently because one is rented and one is not.
I didn't say, I'm not
I understand
suggesting.
that. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm pointing out, yeah, I do think the fact that it's used commercially for rentals in your town more often than other towns, it may make you zone differently. It may make you worry more about parking and pools and, you know, noise ordinances, and all the other things that come with regulating a town. So, yeah, sure, it's a zoning consideration.
That's all I'm saying.
But what Bill's pointing out to you is residential use is a residential use. So,
But,
you know, we can't say you can have a fence if you're a full-time resident, but not if you're a renter.
no, I'm not even suggesting that. All I'm saying is, if we're opening up this document to see whether it's still helpful and current, then that's an issue that's there, whether we do this or not. And why not discuss it? If we're going to be a discussion group to flesh out the master plan, why not discuss that?
Well, we're not fleshing out the master plan. We did that. We had.
I don't mean-
6 months
I guess I didn't mean-
A year and a half and 5,000 meetings on master plan. This is supposed to be.
Implementation.
This is supposed to be council implementing the master plan that you all spend thousands and thousands of dollars on and hours and hours of
Yeah,
meetings. So
which really brings us back to recommendation number 45, which is, I think, what we're doing right now.
Let's go for it then. That sounds like near the end. 45.
I don't have that one. That's on the last tier.
Yeah. Oh, there is another group then.
That was a creative way to get to 45, though, Dennis. You really wound us up and then just landed on 45. I'm impressed. I'm impressed with the way you walked into it.
But Bill, you weren't finished with what you
Now,
were doing.
I have a few more, but I'm fine with Dennis' suggestions. Now, my approach to that is, that's what we're doing.
That's my approach.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
That's why I think we should discuss these things, even if it doesn't look like it has.
We're doing it, we're doing it without even knowing it.
Yeah,
We're not even being,
so that could be another piece of low-hanging fruit, then,
it could-
couldn't it?
yes.
Yeah, you're all on the implementation committee.
That's a
So we'll
low-hanging
add
fruit.
45 to that and say we accomplished that.
Who creates the implementation committee?
Council.
If it's necessary.
If-
But if we're doing that work anyway, why?
I agree,
why
yeah.
duplicate it?
I'd rather us actually do it than have council tell us we have to do it, frankly.
So we'll just ask council to appoint us as the implementation committee, advisory committee, right? All right, I'll go back to where we were, right, 15, 16, and 17. 19, which we already sort of touched on, which was the beach strand zonings.
I thought we added that one to 1.
That was the first
That was
one.
the low-hanging.
Oh, we did add that to 1, yes, we did, yes. 24, which we've already hit on. Workforce housing, which will take a lot of discussion. 27, parking trust fund. And I think that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah, that one's, I don't think that's low hanging.
Okay. Now, 33.
Is there a fifth here somewhere?
33,
Which one?
parking,
33.
33?
yep. 34. You want to maybe touch on that, or you just want to leave that laying for now?
34, I think we
Who's in that?
probably addressed this with the implementation of the new stormwater regs.
Yeah,
So we should have moved that up to
Yeah. And
34.
That's almost, isn't that complete?
Governing body is considering the lesser standards too. Have they done that yet? Have they introduced?
34?
Approved?
Yeah, that's been
Yeah, I think
introduced.
I think we did.
Introduced and approved?
So
So
We,
I think it's first reading.
okay.
Yeah,
So we're in
right,
the midst
first
of
reading,
that occurring. Okay.
With
everybody's,
not much comment,
no.
Okay.
you know.
Okay.
34 looks like it's a,
That's, looks
So
like.
effectively, that's complete then,
So I think we could, yeah, that's, for the most part, complete.
from our perspective.
Yes.
38. I think this sort of goes back somewhat to the setback issue, Craig.
Let me see here. Okay. So this probably goes hand in hand with our setback changes. What's happening as these houses go up, I talked about double stairways and big wide stairways and irregular shaped stairways in the front yards. So there should be some type of controls for those.
And even the stairs to the utilities. You know, when you have to put your electric meter up and.
Right.
All right, so that can sort of, that's going to dovetail into
So, yeah, we'll have that one on the C.
38,
What was it?
38.
38 was very similar to number 42.
Correct. Yes, and it piggybacks into 42. Um, 40 actually can probably, I have 40 down here only because it's not something we have handy right now.
Yeah, so that's probably an easy one, too.
Okay.
Essentially, just updating the checklist requirements. There's references to the old datum in there, like, so there needs to be just refreshed.
So, and
That's
the last one I
17.
have is 43, which is, that's apparently already been done. No?
No. Some of these are controversial, too, I think.
Oh, you want to leave that one off?
That is a list that I was asked to give of potential points, and that's all of them.
Right.
That we could do through land use.
So that might be a separate discussion.
Okay.
But it's an important one. I don't know if, I mean, Lou knows, but I don't know if anybody saw a couple of the post-Sandy,
All of the Sandy ABFE points expired, and we were fortunate enough not to move a class, but.
but a couple local municipalities
Yeah,
did.
You've probably been reading about the towns in
Right.
paper that are in danger of going from one class to another.
2 or 3 classes.
Right.
For some of them.
Which is a huge increase in flood insurance rates.
So we just want to make sure that we're staying on top of, how far are we from the
And-
next level?
We are, we were previously, had scored enough points for a class 3 with, or a class 4 without the watershed master plan that allowed us to go to a 4. With the removal of the Sandy points, we are now at the appropriate amount of points for a class 5. We have since done the master plan, so we will score some points on that, getting us into that 4 tier, assuming all other things remain equal. But also, we are up for a recycle visit, which is when they completely make you go through the ringer on all this stuff in September.
So we're going to need some more points, bottom line.
Okay. And if I were to just quickly glance at this and say, D is a fairly simple one, because most of our critical facilities are not located in flood zones right now.
D?
Our public works yard is outside. This campus area is outside of the flood zone.
Is there a clock ticking on this?
Only if we wanted to count towards our recycle visit in September. So, yes, there's a clock ticking.
So, okay.
And then as soon as that clock rings, then we got 5 more years to consider it.
Okay.
So you start, but then you get a 5-year reprieve?
No, they score us in September. And if the ordinance isn't in place in September, it's like a snapshot, then it doesn't count to your scoring until 5 years from now.
Is there something you need this board to do?
We can just include this in the discussion. I'll come back with more information as to where we look like we're going. And if there is a particular recommendation that may be helpful, I'll certainly let us
So
know.
we could pull us as a standalone, and you guys would bring it back to us?
Yes.
We're talking about 43?
Yes.
Talking about- Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else have any other, I mean, the ones I didn't pick out, anybody think?
One easy one that Rich would probably agree with, as we go through these and we have challenges to our ordinance and everything, we always refer to the definitions. Well, there's a lot of terms and uses and things that aren't defined in our ordinance that are not contained in a definition section. So as we go through this, I think we should refresh the definitions and make sure that all of our terms are defined, so they're enforceable and justifiable.
Are you keeping a list of those terms?
I have quite a few high marked and, yes.
So that's
And-
low-hanging fruit, too.
So unless we have an application, which I don't know, how close are we, Karen, to have an application?
Oh, we have to, oh, never mind.
Oh, yeah, there's some things in the pipeline, but nothing ready right
We
now.
have to announce, right? That's the zoning board?
That's zoning board.
Okay, all right, good. Let's get nervous.
I almost did that, too.
So I was just going to suggest that the next meeting we have, we should be prepared to move some of these things forward.
Okay. So what I will do is I will start drafting ordinances that address these items that you've prioritized with the aid of Mr. King. And once we feel that we have a product that's able to be given to you for review and comment and approval, I'll forward that to you before the meeting. Okay?
Mr. Chairman, can I ask another question?
Of course.
Before we go on? It's number 21.
I know.
Number 21. I bring this up because it's something that I was a little confused with at first, because that, in C3 in particular, which is the beachfront commercial properties, the height requirement for buildings in that zone, in that district, is, I believe, the same as it is everywhere else.
Correct.
And given the reality of the philosophy of this master plan is to encourage commercial development and make it as vibrant and viable as possible, and the only thing that came to mind immediately was the height requirement. There may be others. Is the height requirement in that zone conducive to encouraging commercial development? And that, I bring that up only as an example of the kinds of things we might want to look at as we exercise our responsibility under recommendation number 21, which is to take a comprehensive reexamination and address the standards in the commercial districts.
I missed the first part of your statement. What zone were you talking about?
C3.
The C3.
Yeah.
You're suggesting raising the building height?
I'm not suggesting anything. I'm suggesting that,
So that's,
You did mention the
that's
building height.
controversial.
I'm suggesting that the building height,
You're gonna,
the current building height standard would make a brand-new building built as a commercial enterprise in C3 about a third of the size of at least half a dozen buildings on that block right now.
Say that again?
if you required a builder to develop that building at a maximum height of 35 feet, it would be a half to a third of the size of existing buildings on the properties, on that street.
You got-
Congress Hall,
You got examples like
in
that?
that district, rather.
Well, I think he's saying something like the Victorian is much lower than the Marquee,
The Inn of Cape May,
is what he's saying.
the
The Inn,
Inn of Cape May is 65 feet high.
right, and the other motels are lower, and so he's suggesting that maybe you
Glorious.
examine them and you say that they can go up to 65 feet as well, and not change the character of the
Well,
beachfront.
the Atlas,
Which is-
the Ocean
yeah.
Club is 6 stories.
Parking.
The old Glorious building is up there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Marquis de Lafayette.
right.
So are we putting this in first tier or second tier?
Pardon me?
So actually, all I wanted to do, all I wanted to do is help me understand what, what our
Yes.
course of action would be regarding recommendation number 21. Do we want to go into the commercial, as our master plan recommends we do we want to go into the commercial districts and do a comprehensive reexamination of the standards in those districts? And one example stands out in my mind is the height of the requirements. That's all.
Well, my reading of that paragraph is it really relates more to new trends and new uses as opposed to built structures.
Right, I don't think we certainly weren't talking about building heights. It's been my experience in some of our applications that would not be looked upon favorably from the community.
It mentions axe throwing in here. That actually could happen.
Well, we will take every application for a variance to course and treat it fairly.
But
I
that
mean,
is-
I mean that seriously. I mean, the variance is, one of the elements for a variance is surrounding buildings, and they can present that, and, you know.
That's not on the list right now, but if that's something you want to bring up that you think we should really more closely look at, we're trying to move on everything that was suggested in the master plan. And if it doesn't work,
That's tier one.
I already had this conversation. I don't think so. Can't do it.
that's
Well,
why,
by default, by being on
Yeah.
the list, it's on the tier.
So, Mr. Chairman, we've mentioned a bunch of them. We kind of, it seems like everyone kind of agrees on what at least is tier 1 and tier 2. What do you think is the next step
the next step is what Craig just said. He's going to draft something
for each one?
for each one.
Okay.
And we'll go through that next meeting, and then
Okay, perfect,
we'll jump down to the next tier after that.
perfect.
Affordable housing will be in there. Yes. Which one? That was 34, wasn't it?
24.
Workforce, 24.
And we said that's 22, 23.
Yeah, 24 is the next. Affordable housing or workforce housing is something that's going to take a little longer than all those other ones.
Phase 2.
Yeah.
We're going to address workforce housing. Affordable housing comes due in 2025.
Yeah.
So those are two different terms.
Yes, they are.
We're going to learn about that soon.
Okay, everybody's good with where we're moving?
I wasn't here last meeting because I had COVID, but thank you, everyone, for rehiring me. I do appreciate it. I do enjoy working here. I'm invested in your
We
community.
hired TJ.
Thank you.
We
What's
hired
that?
TJ.
Well, then, I will be sure to send TJ. I'm sorry, I fought him to be here tonight, you know, I was dying to. This is the low-hanging fruit, but thank you, everyone. I appreciate you hiring me.
Yeah, our last meeting was less than an hour. I think TJ took credit for that.
Yeah, this one's my fault, 2 hours.
12
Yes.
12 minutes.
No, it's not, it's an hour and a half.
It felt like it.
Felt like that. All right, motion to adjourn?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.